Love was never an option for Brooke. From a young age, she learned that trusting someone was the first step to disappointment. She grew up in an unstable home, watching her mother be deceived by empty promises. Men came and went from their lives like shadows, leaving only invisible scars. Time taught her to be strong. Brooke didn't have the luxury of surrendering to dreams or romantic illusions. Her world was made up of bills to pay, deadlines to meet, and an exhausting routine at the luxury hotel where she worked. But there was something inside her that no one could see, a hidden talent. Since childhood, she had drawn worlds she could never live in, written stories she would never have the courage to star in. Her notebook, always kept safe, was the only place where she allowed herself to dream. But dreaming didn't pay the bills. So, she locked away her desires tightly. Love? That was for the weak. And Brooke refused to be weak. Caleb Carter had everything money could buy. But what money couldn't buy was what mattered most. Owner of a business empire, he was the kind of man who made the world stop when he entered a room. Tall, imposing, with a calculating gaze that always seemed to analyze everything around him. But there was something about him that others didn't notice. A heavy silence. A darkness hidden beneath the impeccable facade. Caleb carried a past that few knew about. A secret buried so deep that no one dared to question it. The only thing keeping him upright was discipline. He lived for business, to maintain control. But no matter how hard he tried, there were ghosts that never let him rest. And that night, in that hotel, fate would decide to toy with him once again. The night was hectic at the hotel, demanding guests, endless requests. Brooke was focused, trying to finish her shift without any mishaps. But then, everything happened too fast. She hurried around the corner, her eyes fixed on a tray of orders, when she felt the impact. A strong collision. Something warm trickled down her clothes, and on the expensive suit of the man in front of her, the silence was overwhelming. Brooke looked up and found two cold, intense eyes staring back at her. It was Caleb. The coffee cup she spilled stained his impeccable shirt, but he said nothing. He just looked at her as if he could see something beyond the accident. Brooke didn't know why, but she felt a shiver down her spine, as if, somehow, that night was going to change her life forever. For Brooke, that day started like any other. Her routine at the hotel was exhausting but predictable. However, after the incident with Caleb, something unexpected happened. The next morning, her supervisor called her for a private conversation. With a neutral tone, the woman explained that the billionaire guest would be requesting her services for a temporary job. The proposal was unusual. Brooke would need to accompany him to specific commitments outside the hotel, acting as a sort of informal assistant. Confused, her first reaction was to refuse. Why would a man like Caleb need her? But the supervisor made it clear. It wasn't a request, but a requirement from the guest. Moreover, the pay was generous, something Brooke couldn't ignore. That afternoon, dressed in clothes provided by the hotel for the occasion, she was taken to his suite. The environment was sophisticated but carried a calculated coldness, as if the luxury there had no personality. Caleb greeted her without formality, without a smile. He simply handed her an envelope containing instructions. The task seemed simple: organize some documents and accompany Caleb to a meeting. But soon, Brooke realized there was more to this invitation than met the eye. During the meeting, she noticed suspicious glances, half-spoken phrases, and an atmosphere of veiled tension. She didn't quite understand what was happening, but she saw Caleb's expression change. There, he was not just a powerful man. There was something about him, a weight invisible that kept him on the edge of his own existence. And for the first time, Brooke wondered if she had made a mistake by accepting that job. Brooke didn't like the feeling of being pulled into something she didn't understand. Her agreement with Caleb was supposed to be simple: a temporary job, extra money, and nothing more. But from that first meeting, she sensed that there was something more to the offer, something she didn't want to uncover. The first week was marked by a silent tension. Caleb was neither rude nor kind. He limited himself to delegating tasks, observing Brooke with a discreet curiosity. He seemed to want to understand her, but without openly showing his interest. For her part, Brooke remained firm. She avoided unnecessary conversations, answered only what was necessary, and did everything to make that job end quickly. The problem was that Caleb didn't seem willing to let her go that fast. With each passing day, their professional relationship gained subtle layers of complexity. Brooke began to notice that Caleb always found ways to keep her close, whether by asking her opinion on trivial matters or by delegating small tasks that he clearly could do alone. The climax occurred one night when he found her sitting in one of the hotel corridors, lost in her own drawings. Brooke was startled to see him there and quickly tried to hide the notebook, but Caleb had already seen it. He didn't comment on it. He simply stared at her for a few seconds longer than necessary before continuing on his way. In the following days, Brooke noticed a change. Caleb began asking questions unrelated to work, small provocations disguised as casual conversations. He asked about her hobbies, her preferences, as if he were trying to find cracks in her armor. This irritated her. She didn't want closeness. She didn't want someone like Caleb looking at her as if there was something to be discovered. So, she decided to be stricter, limiting interactions to a minimum. But Caleb was not a man who accepted barriers so easily. And even though she didn't know it, he had already noticed something in her that she couldn't even see in herself. Brooke couldn't ignore the strange feeling that Caleb carried an invisible weight. Whenever she thought she was starting to understand him, he would pull back, retreating into an impenetrable silence. She realized this one night when she went to deliver some documents to his office. Caleb was standing by the panoramic window, his eyes lost on the horizon. He didn't even notice her presence immediately. She was supposed to just drop off the papers and leave, but something in his posture, a subtle rigidity, a tension in his shoulders, made her hesitate. On the table beside him, a picture frame turned down caught her attention. It didn't match the rest of the impeccably organized environment, a detail out of place. When Caleb noticed her presence, the change was instant. He quickly composed himself, took the documents, and thanked her without looking directly at her. Brooke wanted to ask, but she held back. In the following days, she began to notice small lapses in Caleb. He maintained control almost all the time, but at certain moments, when he thought no one was watching, his expression became laden with a weight she couldn't name. His silence began to bother her in a way she didn't expect. And then, chance decided to intervene. One night, after leaving the hotel following a long shift, Brooke saw Caleb standing outside, leaning against the car, staring intently at his phone. The glow of the screen reflected on his face, highlighting the shadows under his eyes. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle. Before she could walk away, a sharp sound cut through the night, the noise of glass breaking. Caleb's phone was on the ground. The cracked screen reflected the light from the surrounding streetlights. He didn't bend down to pick it up. Brooke knew she should just keep walking, pretend she hadn't seen anything. But for some reason, even she didn't understand. She stood still. That was when he spoke, without looking at her. Have you ever had something you've spent your whole life trying to forget? The tone didn't demand an answer. It was a thought cast into the wind, as if he were speaking to himself. Brooke didn't know what to say, and for the first time, she realized that perhaps Caleb was much more than the enigmatic and unattainable man everyone saw. She felt a strange tightening in her chest. Not because she wanted to get to know him better, but because she realized that somehow, he was already beginning to affect her. In the following days, something changed. It wasn't immediate or obvious, but it was there, a subtle shift in the air whenever Brooke and Caleb crossed paths. She first noticed it in his gaze. Before, Caleb would observe her with that controlled expression, as if he were analyzing everything around him without ever truly engaging. Now, there was a hint of a different curiosity, something that made her wonder if he saw her as more than just a temporary employee. And Brooke hated to admit it, but she also began to notice things about him that hadn't caught her attention before. For example, how Caleb always seemed to anticipate her reactions, as if somehow he already knew when she would try to raise her barriers. One afternoon, while organizing some documents, she felt his presence before she even heard his voice. "You shouldn't spend so much time in the office," he casually remarked, without taking his eyes off the tablet where he was analyzing graphs. Brooke looked up, frowning. "It's my job," she replied, maintaining the formality. Caleb closed the tablet and looked directly at her. "Work is different from exile." The phrase struck her in a strange way. She wanted to say that she wasn't exiling herself from anything, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true, and Caleb seemed to know it too. That night, as she left the hotel, Brooke noticed an unusual commotion at the entrance. A sudden storm was hitting the city, and several staff members and guests were trying to shield themselves from the torrential rain. She tightened her coat around her body, calculating the distance to the nearest bus stop. She was about to run when a black car slid to the curb, the passenger door opening automatically. It was Caleb. "Get in," he said without any hesitation. Brooke blinked. "No need," he then said. "I know, but you're freezing." It was true, but there was something more there, a simple gesture, but one that carried a meaning greater than he let on. She got into the car. The silence during the ride was unexpectedly comfortable. When they arrived at her building, Caleb didn't say anything. He just waited for her to get out, keeping his gaze fixed on the street ahead. Before closing the door, Brooke hesitated. "Thank you." It was just one word, but it carried more than gratitude. That night, as she tried to sleep, she realized her mind kept returning to that moment, to his gesture, to how, for the first time in a long time, someone seemed genuinely to care without expecting anything in return. And that scared her more than anything, because no matter how hard she tried to deny it, something inside her was beginning to unravel. And Caleb, without saying anything, was helping to tear down the barriers she had spent her entire life building. The air was heavy that night. Brooke felt it even before she encountered Caleb. Something inside her whispered that there was an invisible boundary about to be crossed, a point of no return she had avoided for too long. She knew that what she was about to discover would change everything, but the intensity of the anticipation, mixed with fear and curiosity, left her in a state of constant tension. When the discovery happened, it wasn't in the way she expected. A forgotten document on his office desk, an old news article shining on the computer screen. Each fragment of that truth, like pieces of a cruel puzzle, formed an irreversible picture she wasn't prepared to face. The last name was the same, and the face of the man in the photo, even younger, was unmistakable. The headline, dated years ago, revealed the tragedy that ruined a family. "Family destroys own empire after tragic scandal." Brooke read every word, feeling the weight of history crashing down on her, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. As the truth came to light in waves, each detail fit into a picture that had previously seemed hazy. Caleb was not just a successful businessman. He was the sole survivor of a devastating family collapse, a burden he had carried alone for so long. He was the younger brother, the one who was supposed to inherit an empire, but instead inherited pain and guilt. The father, a powerful figure on the rise, saw his world crumble in the face of accusations of fraud and corruption, while the mother, a silent shadow, disappeared from the spotlight, unable to cope with the tragedy. The older brother had refused to face the consequences, leaving Caleb to deal with the ashes of what was once one of the most influential families in the country. And now, the truth was exposed. Every moment they had spent together, every silent gesture he had toward her, seemed to crumble under the weight of this revelation. Brooke found herself retreating, as if she were standing at the edge of an abyss. The thought that Caleb might not have been genuine, that all the connection they shared could have been an illusion, paralyzed her. The world seemed to narrow as she gathered her things. Her heart raced, and her hands trembled, a reflection of the emotional turmoil enveloping her. All she wanted was distance, a way to escape that painful reality. When Caleb finally found her, his gaze was a mixture of understanding and pain, as if he already knew what she had discovered. But there were no words between them. The silence was deafening, and no explanation could erase the truth now laid bare. Brooke turned away before he could try to stop her. What she wanted was not to hear, not to get involved. At that moment, for the first time, she realized it wasn't just Caleb who was broken. She was too, and the idea of opening up to that was terrifying. The fear of allowing someone into her life and revealing her vulnerabilities became overwhelming. It felt safer to remain in her solitude, away from the pain love could bring. Time passed in a blur after the discovery. Brooke tried to move on, but Caleb's absence became a persistent shadow in her life. The world around her continued to spin, but inside her, everything felt frozen, as if time had lost its meaning. The hotel routine, once a safe distraction, now seemed monotonous and empty. Every corner of the place carried silent reminders of the moments they shared, like echoes of a happiness that felt so distant. The office where he challenged her to believe in herself, the desk where she sketched her first drafts without realizing someone was watching, and the terrace where, for a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream of a different future. She tried to ignore those feelings, suffocating them as she always had. However, something inside her had already changed, and the internal struggle became increasingly intense. It was only when she impulsively decided to open her notebook and looked at the drawings she had never shown anyone that she realized the truth. Every line, every stroke, every detail screamed something she had refused to accept until that moment. The art she had created was not just an escape, it was an expression of who she truly was. The intensity with which she drew after meeting Caleb showed that he had touched something deep within her. Amidst all that fear, there was an emerging strength she never knew she had. The problem had never been Caleb. The problem was the fear she carried within herself, the fear of giving herself completely, of failing, of being hurt again, the fear of believing she could have something more than just surviving. But now, there was no turning back. When she made her decision, her heart raced, but for the first time, it wasn't fear, it was courage, something she had always avoided, but now burned like fire inside her. Finding him wasn't difficult. Caleb was never the type to hide, and from a distance, she could see that he also carried the weight of her absence. There were no rehearsed words, no absolute certainties, just a moment of shared vulnerability, a time when all that mattered was each other's presence. The connection they had built, even amidst so many uncertainties, was palpable. Then, without promises or guarantees of a future, something shifted between them. Brooke didn't know what would come next, but there was a new determination in her heart. She was choosing to live, and that, in itself, was the beginning of everything. With that thought, she approached him, and in that moment, she understood that love wasn't weakness, but rather the strength that pushed her to face her fears and allow herself to be vulnerable. Brooke looked deeply into Caleb's eyes, where the shadows that had once surrounded him seemed to dissipate, even if momentarily. He was there, open, and something inside her lit up. She took the initiative, holding his hand gently. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a depth that reflected all the words that didn't need to be spoken. The world around them faded away, and all that existed were the two of them, their intertwined stories, the scars of the past, and the possibility of a shared future. Caleb, surprised, looked at Brooke with newfound understanding. She was no longer just the assistant he had hired. She had become someone essential in his life. They were in this journey together, and finally, the distance that had once separated them felt smaller. He leaned in closer, and the touch of their hands made her heart race. There, in that moment, amidst all the uncertainties, they both realized they were ready to face whatever came next. After weeks of meetings and deep conversations, where they opened their hearts and shared their fears and hopes, Caleb made an unexpected proposal. On a starry night, under a sky reflecting the beauty of what they were building together, he knelt down and, with a sparkle in his eyes, asked Brooke to marry him. For him, that question wasn't just about a formal commitment, but about the promise of building a life together, where each could be truly free. Brooke felt a wave of emotion wash over her at those words. The love that had blossomed between them was not a weakness, but a strength that made them stronger together. With tears of joy, she said yes, and the emotion of the moment enveloped her. They embraced, and everything around them seemed to shine with a new light. The following months were filled with planning and shared dreams. Brooke allowed herself to explore her creativity again, dedicating time to writing and drawing, while Caleb supported her unconditionally, always encouraging her to pursue her desires. They discovered a new world together, traveling, learning, and growing as individuals and as a couple. Finally, the big day arrived. In an intimate ceremony, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated their love, Brooke and Caleb exchanged their vows. The knowing glances and sincere laughter reflected the journey they had traveled and the bright future awaiting them. As they became husband and wife, they felt that every challenge faced had prepared them for that moment. And so, they began a new life together, where love was not just a feeling, but the foundation that supported everything they had built. Living happily, they faced the world hand in hand, knowing that, no matter what happened, they would have each other to weather any storm. And above all, Brooke discovered that she could finally be vulnerable and still be strong.